Good morning, Smarter News. Happy Monday. Hope you're off to a great day wherever you are. I have a ton to show you today, and I'm excited to work through some of the news with you at maybe a little bit of a slower pace and taking a big step back. I just wrote the team and said, here are some of the stories we're covering as we start off this week. And admittedly, these are some heavy stories, but whenever I feel that heaviness of the news, I realize that hitting it right on is the most important thing that we can do. So that's what we're going to do today. The news also provides us some perspective. Last night, I did not sleep at all. At all. And part of the reason was I was sorting through the news in my mind. And that happens to me every once in a while. But what's great about the news is that the headlines can also bring you a lot of perspective. So I wasn't sleeping, but this morning I listened to an interview with a 35-year-old mother in Afghanistan. And you want to know what she said? She said she couldn't sleep either, but it was for completely different reasons. I'm going to hit that off the top because I really want us to pay attention to what's happening in Afghanistan. We're about a little bit over 20 days until the full U.S. withdrawal. And I say full because we'll have some presence in the country, but we're really at a historic moment. And I don't want us to lose sight of what's happening there. So real quick here, let me just show you what happened over the weekend. The red circled areas on this map show really important capitals in provinces that have been taken over by the Taliban. We've been watching this closely because we're looking at these key strategic cities to see if the Taliban gain control. And look, you can see where the red is in the north. You also see some in the south. And there's a question about how the Taliban could be converging on Kabul, the capital of the country, and how that could also be very significant to lose the capital to the Taliban. The two areas in blue are some of the cities that we've talked about most recently in the south, Kandahar being one of them. So we have to watch very carefully what's happening there. I want to show you some perspective. So here's what last summer looked like. This is from our friends over in the Long War Journal. That kind of orange area is the contested area in Afghanistan. The red area is where the Taliban was at the time. Here's what it looks like today. You can see the red and the almost, really the Taliban sweeping the nation of Afghanistan. What are the stakes here? There's been a lot of questions about the relationship between the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Some of the differences between these two groups really come down to intellectual debates between experts. Sometimes the differences are not so obvious to others, and that's something that we can explore more. Why does Afghanistan matter? We have to remind ourselves this is where the plan for 9/11 was hatched. Safe haven was given to Al-Qaeda through the Taliban, and so the question again becomes whether or not Afghanistan is a launching pad for future terrorist attacks. So this really matters. It does bring up the question, though, about who the enemy really is. And sometimes when we're looking at stories, stories divide into two really distinct areas because that's natural for us, right? Light and dark, far and near. We like to divide things into two parts because it simplifies. But we always want to take a moment to think about, well, what really is the enemy? And I was thinking about this related to COVID because there's so many, right? We're looking at COVID in America as in very linear ways, right? It's the North versus the South. It's the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated. It's the masking versus the unmasking. But what's the real enemy here? The enemy is the virus, right? The enemy is the virus. We want to be able to defeat the virus. And so I thought as I was going through all these new CDC studies and all this new debate this weekend, I thought what we can really add to this is just going back to basics. And that's what I'm going to show you today. So I have a whole bunch of different graphs to show you. Let's see how I do. Where is COVID in America? What does it really look like in America? Who's to blame for COVID-19 in America? Let me show you the current map. This is what COVID looks like in America right now. Almost the entire nation is red. This is from the CDC. This is looking at COVID-19 transmission. So when you're thinking about areas of vaccinated, unvaccinated, masking, not masking, geography, remember this map. This is what the country looks like right now, wherever you stand on any of these issues. Transmission is really high. Let's go ahead then and look a little deeper. These are the cases right now. This is the cases in America. When you look and you take away from transmission, where are the cases? You can see the cases are still in some of the biggest states. And that also, there's a lot to dig in there for the specific states, but you can see California, Texas, Florida, Louisiana's in there too. We don't want to forget that. These are where most of the cases are happening in the country. Well, where are the most serious cases? If those are what the cases are, where are the most serious cases? Here are where the deaths are being reported. You're seeing more of the deaths being reported in places like Texas and Florida right now, where we're seeing the case level very high. When we're talking about who's dying, that's also really important. It's something that hasn't necessarily changed that much, and sometimes we're watching this very much a developing story. One thing that's remained true is that the older you are, the more vulnerable you are to more serious side effects from COVID. And so I want to show you this graph. This was looking at data from just over 500,000 deaths. So we're about 100,000 above that, but this is what the information is that we know. If you look at the percentages, 90% of the deaths happen in those 50 and older. So that remains also true, as you can see that graph. I want to show you something also very important as we're breaking down the area into geography. You can also look at what the breakdown is according to your county. And I'm going to put this video underneath this video on our website, and you can play around with it yourself because you can look at the county that you're in. I looked at it for Travis County, which is the biggest county in my area, and that's how you can see Texas broken up into different counties. So we're not just relying on big broad strokes for different states. You can actually look at community transmission and hospitalization and deaths in your particular area. Remember, I told you a couple weeks ago, one of the things we're watching with the Delta variant is when do we see cases turn into hospitalizations and deaths? Oftentimes the incubation period can be 2 to 4 weeks, so you got to give it a little bit of time. Yes, we are seeing hospitalization rates go up, but right in the middle there, that's the beginning of the year when we had that really big spike. So we're seeing that climb, but you should also know that while that climb is happening, we are having some doctors say, anticipating a peak to that climb around Labor Day. How did they arrive at that is a question I'm going to be asking. And obviously there's a lot of different folks that are forecasting what potentially is out there. A couple more assets I want to show you. Here's something else. When you look at hospitalizations, these are new admissions according to age group. So that big spike is from the older age group, and then we're going slightly younger. Look at that yellow line. I want to sit here for a second. That yellow line is 0 to 17-year-olds. You can see that line just slightly goes up. Let's zoom in on that line so we can really take a look what hospitalizations look like for kids, because you might be hearing a lot about that. And I want to show you what that looks like when you zoom in. Okay, 0 to 17, you can see that that hospitalization rate is back to where it was around the peak, our last major peak for infection. So this is why there's a raised concern or a heightened concern about COVID-19 in kids, because we are seeing hospitalizations go up. However, really important, because I know, the kids are going back to school. We're seeing some schools in certain areas having to send kids home to quarantine already, even shut down for a couple of days. I was looking at an interview on that this morning. Remember that the rates for hospitalization in children overall are very, very, very low. So even when I look at hospitals that are talking about an uptick in kids' cases, the uptick can be also low. A handful of kids. We don't want to see any kids, but a handful of kids. So when we're seeing some of those graphs, it's easy to let our imagination kind of run off, right? Are we seeing dozens of kids, hundreds of kids, thousands of kids? We need some context for that. So we could see a really big increase from kids and hospitalizations because we're coming from such a low point. And one of the big questions for the Delta variant, is it more dangerous for children? Is it more deadly? And unfortunately, for some of this, we're going to have to wait and see and make sure that we're giving the numbers some perspective. So these are some of the things I want to walk you through today, because some of the studies that I'm seeing, and I went through quite a few of them last night from the CDC, there's some, I like to bullet point these for you and make sure I can isolate different takeaways, but I found these studies very difficult, in part because they're very small. Some of them don't necessarily completely reflect the time that we're in with the new variant. And that's why we have to dig in a little bit with this new variant. And guess what? Dr. Rutland's going to be joining us for a town hall tomorrow, because he's really into the science. We're going to talk about what does the Delta variant really look like, and we're going to take your questions. We're gaming for around noon Central Time tomorrow about that, but I'll confirm later today so that you all can ask some of the questions. But I wanted to just give you set the stage. So when you're seeing COVID news this week, you kind of have some context for where we've come from, where we are right now, what we're watching the next 2 to 4 weeks, so that we can take the news in with some perspective. I hope that's helpful to you. It was helpful to me to look over some of these graphs. Can I answer any questions for you guys before I take off today? I see. One of you are asking, do any of these studies, are they looking at those that already had COVID? Yes. So one of these studies and from the CDC is looking at a particular group in Kentucky. They took a group, and I'm just going to kind of just big broad strokes, looked at a group of people that tested positive for COVID in 2020. And then later, in this May to June period, had another positive test. Then they broke it down according to age groups, who got vaccinated and who didn't. And one of their takeaways is that those that got vaccinated with a prior infection had a much lower chance of reinfection than someone that did not get vaccinated. So that's coming to the question of, is natural immunity as strong or equal to or the same as immunity granted by a vaccination? That's coming to like kind of the core question. What they were looking at though with this study is only those with prior infection. And what they said is when they looked at this, those with a prior infection and a vaccine had less likely chance of reinfection, although reinfection in general was very low. One of the things I think is missing from this study, I read it a couple times, I could be missing, some of these studies are pretty complicated, is what is reinfection? When we talk about reinfection, is that someone that tested positive for COVID-19, let's say last summer, and then was going to a wedding and had to test before a wedding and ended up testing positive, but they're asymptomatic. So when we're talking about reinfection, are we talking about just positive tests or someone that's really sick? Does that change if you're vaccinated or unvaccinated? So when we're talking about reinfection, is that just a positive case or is it someone that's symptomatic? Because any of this idea of reinfection is daunting. But if reinfection means that you get like a little bit of a cold versus you feel so terrible, you're in bed for 2 weeks, that's important information for us, I think, to understand. So that is one of the studies. All right, guys, hope this got you started off on your week. We have a lot of this information, including the links to the videos I used on our website, smarternews.com. Right underneath is the big video box. You'll see it for like a Monday morning. Go ahead and click into that and you'll get all of these different links so that you can kind of poke around the data for yourself. I think that's really important for you to do. Also check out our quick quotes, some important stories that we didn't get a chance to talk about in this video that I think are worth your time as well. And hopefully you can just read a couple minutes and get a little bit of information. Look forward to your questions. Please send them in on COVID-19, the Delta variant, anything you'd like Dr. Rutland to answer. We'll do that tomorrow about noon Central Time. We'll confirm that with you today and look forward to more on smarternews.com. Thanks so much for the support. Have a great week.